temporary sugar hit, as was the money from Three Waters. It will benefit our long-term operating budget every year because the savings from reduced debt are ongoing and every year. I'm also not proposing privatisation. The airport company already operates as a private commercial company listed on the NZX. Our 18% shareholder gives us no meaningful ability to direct it to act against its commercial interest. This was diluted through the capital raising during COVID, shows how little control we have. We have no directors or ability to appoint them. The best way for us and the government to protect the interests of Aucklanders in relation to the airport is by appropriate regulation, which is well developed in New Zealand. I believe selling the shares now makes sense given the rising cost of debt. We'll see what Aucklanders think. If they don't do that, they'll have to do something else. Ports of Auckland Limited. On the ports, I expect the ports to lift their earnings to provide at least $10 million more in free cash into the council's group coffers. That will help too. To round out the mix of levers and tools that we should consult Aucklanders with, we need to use some small short-term debt, but this is obviously not a sustainable, credible approach to fix the budget hole. We have been borrowing increasing amounts for many years, and you cannot borrow your way to wealth. We should all be aiming to maximise the other levers and minimise the amount that we need to draw down with debt, especially as it makes things worse next year and the year after. Mr. Gudsall has had a good set of debt protection measures, but as these come free, all new debt will cost significantly more than what the hedgings have allowed. Consultation. The purpose of this proposal is to put the mix of levers and tools on the table for Aucklanders to consider. There are a number of other things that will need to be considered in the long-term plan, as we need to have more information to consult Aucklanders with. It's just not possible in the short time frame we've had. Voting for this will not mean you agree 100% with the mix of levers I have come up with. None of us agrees with every line of this. No cabinet or parliament ever does. And this governing body fulfills both of those roles. Much more so in past mayoral proposals, I'm proposing that we leave our options open in this consultation and genuinely give ourselves flexibility to respond to the public and changing circumstances. So let us approve it for consultation and hear from Aucklanders what they want council to do before we make the final decisions. I'd like to thank you all again for your hard work, your professionalism and your support. We've got staff to answer any questions here. But before that, I'd like to move the recommendation, and the Deputy Mayor will second this, I believe. So I now open the proposal for sayers and for questions.
Good team effort.
And the yay sayers is opening one.
All right. Well, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your tabling of your proposal. I think you've acknowledged all the people that need to be acknowledged, and it has been tight time frame. Just for our clarification around the table here, what has happened previously, Mr. Mayor, is we've gone around and had a whole series of questions from councillors on the proposal, and then we've all debated or made comment. Do you want to do that that way, or can we ask our questions followed by comment to speed up the process? Have you got a preference?
I think we'll have questions, then
right.
comments rather than long speeches, please.
Yeah. Okay.
And I note to everybody in the room that this has been workshopped on a number of occasions. This is not fresh news to anybody at the council. And it is a bleak time. As I say, I'd wish I was giving Christmas presents.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that. Clarification. So I have four questions. First question is just for clarification. It's probably needed from you, Your Worship, in terms of understanding for local boards. I guess it really kind of boils down to an accounting methodology that could be used or change of practice in terms of if local boards are having to make their overall 5% savings, and they come forward with ideas that aren't related directly to the direct control budget, such as the ABS or LDI, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but it could be around savings in their rent or their administration costs, i.e. staff reductions, potentially around those areas. Typically, if we accounted for that today, my understanding is that probably wouldn't be sheeted back to a savings that they've recommended and therefore get credited with as part of that overall 5% saving. So I guess for the local boards that are listening today...
That'll count.
Yeah. Sorry?
That'll count.
Okay, so we say that, Mayor, but can you just give some assurance to the local board members that are listening today that our accountancy team, or they can, is able to make that credit back to them? Otherwise, it could come as a part of your savings, or could come as be credited back to the Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee savings, where probably they would want it sheeted back to their own savings acknowledged that way. So is there any clarification there, Mr Mayor, that we could make as an organisation for them?
I'd like to answer that in two ways, if I could, through you, Your Worship. The first one is the 295 is a group issue, so every saving helps the group issue. So I wouldn't like anyone to be trapped by accounting rules and not considering options that would improve the situation for the council group, whether that be particularly within their space or not. There are accounting conventions around where budget sits, and usually the saving will accrue to that budget area, but the detail of these is going to be worked through after the decisions today for approval by the governing body in February, and I would like everyone to take the widest possible view on the group position of getting to 295. Ross, did you want to add anything? No.
I think you can take that as a yes.
Right, just another couple of questions. I think this is in your recommendations. We look at recommendation A1E. It's talking about the additional savings expected through that Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee, Your Worship. And it talks about, that's the 7.5 million from Auckland Transport, another 5 million from the parent and the CCOs. So can you just clarify for us all the intention of you putting that wording in there? Does that include giving the ability for that committee to then approach Auckland Transport and the other council-controlled organisations to get itemised expenditure details or raw data from them, so we can actually get under the hood and have a closer look at some of the costs that aren't visible or transparent to us at the moment? So that's how I read it, but if I could just get clarity on your intention there, Your Worship.
Well, first of all, I'm glad we've got the Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee, and in fact they're only just starting, but there are already there's a lot of stuff on the web for both the council and the CCOs that needs to be fully explored. They publish all of their monthly contracts each month. We need to get into those, go through that. I wanted to go back through all of the published annual things and start developing graphs of where over the last 12 years where growth has taken. That will lead us towards where you're going to poke around in that, and will ensure that the CCOs provide sufficient information that you can aid and help them, in particular Auckland Transport, who are responding fairly well to the pressures and understanding that the need for them to look for savings. And generally management across organisations are quite happy to have people identify savings. That's what they're there for. So yes, and if we're not getting a response to that, there will be sufficient nudging to make sure that this does work.
Hey, just two more questions. This question's around the Auckland Airport shares. It may be directed to you, Peter, but it's around dilution there. So is there are you able to confirm that if we have been diluted over the years in terms of our shareholding percentages and the risk, if we don't sell them, of further dilution?
The dilution's almost inevitable. They're about to go to a major raising to fund a new domestic airport, and we will not be contributing to that, so our 18% will soon become about 11 or 10, and at that stage it becomes less and less strategic.
Has that been announced to the market, your suggestion, Mayor?
I think
We're now
it's,
talking about a publicly listed company here. I'm not aware of Auckland Airport announcing a capital raising.
no, I don't think they have announced it yet, but you don't have to be particularly forward-looking to see that that's coming, and there have been unannounced but statements which are leading towards that, and there is a need for a new domestic terminal which they don't have current capital for, so it's almost inevitable.
And through you, Your Worship, I can confirm that there has been dilution over time as set out in the material from the workshops and in today's staff advice. Initially we were at 22.37, today we sit at 18.09 on the basis of not reinvesting in things like dividend reinvestment schemes and taking the cash and also the capital raising that occurred that we were not able to take part in.
Thank you very much. And final question is around the hiring freeze that's currently in place. Just trying to understand the status of that, just to clarify when that started, what it actually means, what is that freeze? I understand it's not all positions, but there's some consideration, deeper consideration being given to employment and fulfilment of vacancies. And since the start of that initiative, how many people have been recruited? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd have to come back with you with the specifics in terms of numbers recruited, numbers on ice. You are correct, this is not a freeze, it's a more selective approach than that. We've continued to make sure that frontline services are recruited for. Obviously, a number of our areas have staffing ratios and service delivery considerations that require that, so the focus has been elsewhere in the organisation in terms of not filling all vacancies, only where it's demonstrably important that happen. So we'll have to come back to you with a little more detail. This is an approach that's, from memory, been in place for around 2 months now.
Thanks, Phil. And is that, I'm making the assumption that that will continue into a foreseeable future, or is there an end date to that?
There's no end date, it's a continuing focus. Clearly what we're trying to do, in recognition of the fact that there are savings to be made progressively through the next 6 months and beyond, we want to get ourselves into a position where we're dealing with staffing impacts through attrition rather than through other means.
Thank you very much, and just reserve my right to speak later. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is about debt cap. In one of the workshops when we talked about the sale of airport shares, I pointed out that the airport shares would reduce our borrowings by around 13%, and that we could drop our debt cap by 13% from 290 to 250, and that I'd like to see it capped there. The response was positive from yourself and staff. Staff said that that was their intention, and that it would also be good with the rating agencies, and we would end up with a better rate, interest rate. Yet here its last bullet point states this will also leave debt headroom for any further capex requirements. Can I ask what's going on?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. The level of the debt cap is probably best considered as part of the long-term plan and looking at the financing policy, and it would be in my opinion, well worth an examination to consider what the level of appropriate debt headroom is. We have adequate debt headroom at the moment. We get good marks from our credit rating agencies for our level of financial management and staying within that debt cap. But I certainly do agree with you that it's something that should be considered. It needs to be sequenced alongside the aspects of paying down that debt, though. So one needs to come before the other, I believe.
Thank you. I reserve the right, please.
Good question. Thank you, Councillor Turner, and I do support that. And I think Mr Guts was correct with it. It's part of the long-term plan. I have Councillor Foley, please.
Kia ora, thank you, Your Worship. My question to staff is about the debt. So some weeks back now, when we had one of our very early workshops, you presented to us options. And option 2, if I recall, had in it advice from yourselves that we could borrow up to around 100 million and that wouldn't have any negative effects, that was still a reasonable option. And there was there were several options presented to us on that day. My question is whether you would consider that is still reasonable and whether that would have any negative effects on us if we were to look at borrowing a little bit more, up to 100, but around the 1995 million mark. Kia ora. Thank you.
Yep, so we were given advice on a range of different options for debt, and across all the levers there's kind of choices about how hard we pull each lever. I think the advice we gave is that within our debt policy parameters, including depreciation funding targets, you could go up to a maximum of 140 million this year. That wouldn't put us outside policy or immediately risk the credit rating in terms of being financially imprudent. But all of the using all of the levers to different extents all have different choices and implications. The problem with using debt to fund more capex as part of the operating solution is it's only temporary. The capacity isn't there in future years. So if we relied more on debt this year, you'd have to find more savings or pull rates levers harder next year and the year after. So it's a temporary benefit. And our advice is that you need a mix of levers that is sustainable over time, credible, etc. So there are implications in terms of that longer term path, in terms of having to find more savings. The other thing with using debt as a lever, there's also interest costs and interest rates are rising. So we'll have to find more savings and also more savings for the interest. So yes, it is an option, but it has a trade-off in terms of needing to pull other levers harder in the next year or two.
Kia ora, thank you, but that does mean, and I am considering it in terms of those levers because those options were presented us in that format, but it would mean we've still got some headroom there as well, right? There's still a decent headroom there in terms of the buffer.
That's correct, and in the recommendations in front of you, there are some options there. So post-consultation, you can consider all the feedback and you can make choices around rates and debt and the mix of levers at the final stage after you hear from the community.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Foley. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. My questions relate to the leadership that the Mayor is putting forward something that has some unpalatables in it for me, but I'm really just trying to understand a little bit more about the type of resilience we need going forward and perhaps the headroom within the debt. I sat through the Audit Committee on Monday, and in terms of what was on the open agenda and the matters that were considered, the only referencing I could get on CRL was to COVID-related matters. So the question, and it may be one for the LTP, and you may not be able to answer it here, but are you aware of any non-COVID-related matters that may be coming to this council in terms of further financial obligations moving forward?
I'm afraid I'm not in a position to be able to answer that, Councillor Fletcher. But through the Mayor, I do note that he mentioned within his opening speech some conversations he's having with CRL currently. And those conversations should lead to us having a greater understanding of the level of cost, whether it's COVID related or non-COVID related, that we'll face in the future. The aspects of consideration for within this budget are that any additional costs that may turn up for CRLL will be at the end of the current profile of expenditure, and as such, while they'll increase debt at this point, they won't have an impact on next year's budget. So that's our current assumption on that. But expect to have numbers in due course when they've worked them through.
Thank you for answering as comprehensively as you can at this stage.
Good question, really. As a sponsor for CRL, I am attending meetings where we've got ourselves in this situation. It's a good project, but it was set up in a manner where we're up for half the money, but we don't have much say. So I am using my large contracting experience to try and limit what may come out of that. And again, that's another difficult thing which has been handed on. It will become an issue, and that's another reason why prudent behaviour at the moment is absolutely essential. We are attempting to mitigate as much as we can the circumstance, and I can't say a lot more of that at the moment, but I'm involved in helping.
So my question is to you, would you be encouraging us to try and remain as resilient as we can and retain as much debt headroom as we can in light of unknowns?
It's an absolute unqualified yes. Councillor Darby, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on the, Peter, just on the Auckland International Airport, and thanks for the information that you presented in the workshop and the thorough analysis there, I think. At that workshop, I talked about the history of earlier this year when we had the unsolicited bid for the Port of Auckland, and that drove us to identify the strategic outcomes because we didn't have any. We had the same with Auckland Airport. At that time, I suggested that we do the same for the Auckland Airport, but that was spurned. At the most recent workshop, I suggested that we do that now for Auckland Airport to identify those strategic outcomes. If we could find any, there may not be. Can you tell me why that work wasn't progressed? Why did we not do that work at this stage to more fully inform us on the next decisions?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Darby, and through you, Your Worship. The current strategy for the shareholding policy for Auckland Airports are contained within the long-term plan, from memory, volume 2, page 291 or thereabouts, and it doesn't necessarily create the strategic objectives. Hence, the staff advice went through the logic tree and decision tree around what those strategic objectives might be. It comes to the conclusion, as you've already aware and have noted, that there aren't strategic objectives necessarily, and it appears to staff at least to be simply a financial investment, and as such it's the aspects of whether that financial investment is appropriate given the circumstances at the time, with which obviously nests with council to make a determination on. So hopefully that answers your question, Councillor.
So you're saying that it's no different to the port investment, which was a financial investment with no strategic outcomes either, though earlier this year we did identify those strategic outcomes, and you thought there was no need to proceed to at least explore the possibility of identifying strategic outcomes. I just want to check that, Peter.
Thank you for the clarifying question. The differential nature between the two investments, and they are classified as such, is the 100% nature for the Ports of Auckland versus the 18.09 for the for the Auckland International Airport. And as such, we went through the steps of: does the council have ownership control imperatives for the asset? Does the council need involvement to ensure its ownership control imperatives are met? Can the council's imperatives be met through regulation or other policies, tools? Can the council contract or a partner to ensure imperatives are met? So it was quite a detailed assessment, and it came to the view that this really is an investment rather than having strategic objectives outside being an investment, predominantly due to an 18% shareholding nature.
Okay, the second question is, considering we're dealing with shareholding which is listed on the NZX, and I know your team has its limitations, we all do, and the market expertise is not contained within your team. And a question I raised with you in the workshop is, were you likely to engage expert, market knowledge, equities knowledge in developing your recommendations? Did that occur? Did we go external and engage market expertise, particularly on the options, a blocking stake, the timing of selling, etc., the various mixes that you've identified in your assessment and analysis? And if so, if we did engage market expertise, what was the name of that consultancy or individual?
Thank you, Councillor Darby. So in terms of market expertise, we've relied at this point, until we have a determination from Council, that we've used freely available information from various advisors who comment on the Auckland Airport shares, and as you'll have noted in the advisors at the moment are mostly calling that the Auckland Airport shares are not undervalued, so we've relied on that aspect. You'll be pleased to know that many, if not all, advisors in this space have offered their assistance and are very willing to come and talk to us. We have not engaged the market at this point on any great consideration on doing it. It would be predetermining the decision to sell at this point, and we'll engage once decisions are made on the best way to optimise that. As such, the options as they are there, based on advice we've received in the past, and freely available market information.
Okay, take that. And just finally, the suggestion in your assessment on the page 37, not on the public agenda here, but of something you presented to us, that if we maintained a 10% blocking stake, that blocks a takeover from a party, then we'd need to reinvest dividends, I'll get that, or participate in capital raising. Can you tell me, and the Mayor suggested that there is a likely capital raising, can you tell me whether the NZX listed, complying with all its rules about full disclosure, has the Auckland International Airport Company at any point announced a capital raising pending?
Thank you, Councillor Darby. I don't believe that I've got the ability to answer that question fully, as I don't engage on a step-by-step basis with the NZX disclosures from Auckland International Airport. I'm not aware of any, but that does not mean that they haven't indicated within their forward-looking prospectus and an intention to improve their investments around the airport.
Thank you, Mayor.
I would also like to note that I have no information that is not publicly available.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note this Mayoral proposal contains 75 million in debt, and you suggested previously, in answer to a previous question, we could go up to 140 million in a workshop. If I have my fingers and toes correctly counted, that's $65 million we wouldn't have to find in savings. Can I, if you have it to hand, do you have the comment that you guys advised us in the workshop about going to 140 million, what that would mean?
Yeah, I think the advice was all similar to my previous response. So we could go up to the 140, be within our debt policy limits, including depreciation funding. What it would mean, if we used more debt, we wouldn't have to find more savings this year. We'd have to find it later. So all it does really is, using a bit of debt buys you time, but it means you've got a bigger task to do next year or the year after. Plus, you have extra interest on top.
Just a follow-up, I'm not sure if you can answer it, but I'll give it a try. Isn't it appropriate to look at a temporary benefit like this, as we've advised, when this process is so rushed, and looking to an LTP year to do something more fundamental?
I think it's a balance. So we need to find things that can be done quickly and give us time to work through things. But we also need to find things that are sustainable, and we don't so we don't build a bigger problem, bigger challenge next year. So it's finding that balance between what are short-term things that can be done quickly versus what is going to put us into a better, more sustainable position, so we don't have bigger challenges and the need for higher rates increases over the next couple of years.
And just to add slightly to that, that's the reason for the 4 criteria within the staff advice of being credible, sustainable, affordable and implementable. Some filters that can be applied to that balanced approach that the governing body decides to achieve.
Okay, on another tack, can I confirm whether proposed cuts to healthy waters maintenance are going to consultation, or has it already happened without asking the public?
So those changes to how we budget for some of that healthy waters maintenance is proposed to be for immediate implementation. It's not necessary. It's not a cut to planned activity. It is about how we budget, how we make provisions for some of the reactive maintenance.
Okay, so in terms of reactive maintenance, do you think it's wise to cut stormwater spend in that way for reactive maintenance when we have 1 in 100 storms every year? Just 18 months ago, one ripped through my ward and Greg's, costing people's homes $1 million of damage. Shouldn't we ask the public about that?
I think the answer, if I could, through your worship, is we're going to be wrong when we budget. That's the nature of budgeting and forecasting. It's never actuals. The best, most prudent way of budgeting is sort of on the average rather than going for a peak. That way we're not overrating. However, we do still have the capacity to respond to events as they occur. It may well be the case that we're seeing that average increase over time, but budgeting appropriately for the midpoint is better than over budgeting for a 1 in 100 type of event.
Yeah, 2 more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Has there been work on this budget indicating how it will impact low-income residents in their communities?
As you appreciate, Councillor Henderson, and through you, Mayor, once we have the decisions from governing body, we'll be able to drill down into more of those aspects. At this point, we do have affordability metrics and aspects which we've considered. We've considered them as part of the general rates and provided advice on that within the material. But the dispersion and distribution of that has not been able to be completed at this time.
Okay, so just so I can confirm, this is my last question, thank you, Mayor. We're not in a position at the moment to provide advice on whether poorer families will get hit harder than those well off?
I'm not sure if that's a statement or a question through the Mayor, but as I've said, we've looked at affordability at a general level. As we get into more detail with our budgets, we separate that out by different locales and local board impacts. We haven't done that at this point.
Thanks.
Thanks. Just to add to that, of course, new debt costs a lot more than the stuff we're getting rid of. So, Councillor Lee.
I thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regard to Auckland International Airport, we can note that prior to the pandemic, the earnings were 59 million per annum in 2019. Does management have any information from Auckland International Airport on any prediction of increase in post-COVID throughput and therefore projected profits post-COVID? Is there any information regarding that?
We have used projected through you, Your Worship. The advice we've provided has used the same information that I mentioned earlier, the market available advisors' views rather than necessarily Auckland International Airport's declaration of their dividend policy. So that's been included in the workshop material. I would note that we do see that increasing over time. However, it would be diluted by that dividend redistribution aspect that I was talking to, but we don't have anything that's not in the public arena. And I'd also note that the 59% was when we had a greater percent of the shareholding. It has been diluted since.
Okay, so we don't have that information. Has that information been sought?
Through you, Mayor, we have the information available for those projected dividends from the market analysts, and we've included that in our material.
I think I'm correct in saying at no stage does the dividend come anywhere near the cost of the debt.
We don't
Councillor
have any
Newman.
debt on Auckland International Airport. They were given to this council for free. There's no debt on the airport shares.
Sorry, our debt. We borrowed to hold things. That's the debt you should be considering. Councillor Newman, would you mind just being a bit closer to your microphone?
Thank you, Your Worship. I took on your advice from yesterday. How am I doing, sir? Peter Ross, the questions that I had, Dr. Weiss has previously indicated that the adjustments and impacts in terms of the changes in maintenance and also, I guess, following on from Councillor Henderson, the healthy waters maintenance changes, I suppose we will have to just accept the advice we received that we can make this happen, but probably the changes wouldn't be significant. How soon can we have a discussion about precisely what those changes will be? I want to know what they look like. I want to know what a change to the mowing and the bin collection services looks like. I want to know what the changes to catchment maintenance looks like, so I can make an assessment as to whether that several $1 million worth of savings is actually worth it, or whether we need to look for something else. So when will you be able to? When will the people in charge of those contracts and Healthy Waters be available to explain that information?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Newman, and through you, Your Worship. That was some of the material that was presented in the workshops, at least at the high level. There's again, it's a high level within the agenda here today. Page 103 talks to some of those aspects. However, I think to fully answer your question requires the level of information that is started in the fact sheets, but then goes into the consultation document itself. Which will be the focus of work from now until you get to consult and adopt the consultation document in February.
Okay, so in early February, because I'm not interested in the high level, my question is specifically, what does this look like? I want to know what this looks like. In early February, we'll be able to sit down with senior management at Healthy Waters and for the people who are responsible for negotiating the maintenance contracts to answer the questions as to what a change in the mowing schedule looks like, what a change in the bin collection and the catchment cleaning looks like. That information will be available in some detail at that point. I appreciate that the information that's been presented so far is high level. I'm after more detail.
Perhaps if I could call my colleague to the table to talk about the implementation aspects, consultation and service.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you very much for your question. So we have looked into this in more detail and we will be providing more information available to the public as well. What we're very mindful of is we want to minimise the impact on our communities and particularly the visibility of some of these proposed changes to our communities. We're proposing some key options here. First one is around the optimisation of bins. So we have a large number of bins across Tamaki Makaurau. Some of those bins are in close proximity. Some bins require a lot less emptying than others. We would not be targeting bins, for example, that are in front of restaurants, busy areas or beaches where we see high usage, but we do have bins that can be reduced in terms of numbers that are less highly used. In terms of the garden or mowing service levels, we're proposing to reduce garden maintenance for some of our gardens, but not the high-profile gardens. So we will be excluding gardens such as the winter gardens, botanic gardens. We will also be excluding cemeteries. For the mowing, we're proposing to look at reducing some of the mowing schedules. And what that could mean in some areas is a 25 millimetre, slightly higher growth of grass. We are trying to do that in a way that minimises the visual impact, but members of the public may see some impact. But we do believe that we can reduce the spending by focusing on these priority areas.
Okay, Dr. Weiss, I think that it would be very good if we could have a more detailed discussion in early February. I'm sure that a number of my colleagues would agree with me on that. Very, very keen to have a discussion about that. My next question, my only other question, Your Worship, and I do reserve my right to speak, I absolutely support the need to seek more savings from Auckland Transport and acknowledge that the mechanism identified is more savings triaged through the Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee. Can I just understand from officers, what is the mechanism to achieve that? They are a CCO, they do have their own management and board, but what is the mechanism to be able to do a dive into that particular organisation, identify, and then direct the savings?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Your Worship. I believe this also goes to a point earlier from Councillor Sayers, and for the avoidance of doubt, it is really important that we don't double count. And also that processes align. However, the focus that I took from the earlier speech from the Mayor was the stretch target elements of the aspects within expenditure control, and also the acknowledgement that there's a lot of alignment between elected members and management in terms of cost savings. In terms of the development of that process to achieve it within the expenditure control, as you know, we had the workshop yesterday to begin that conversation of how to work that through. It is like many things at the moment, a process of development given the pace and speed at which we are trying to move and the pace and speed at which the economic environment is changing. Okay, so are we doing an exchange of letters through the directors of the Board of AT in relation to that? I'm not quite sure
that you're clear as yet what the mechanism will be. I'm more interested in trying to ensure that those bins get emptied ahead of a marketing budget for Auckland Transport. If there's no mechanism at this stage, if you want to acknowledge that, that's fine. But we will need to have some sort of mechanism in place by early February to achieve this.
Actually, there are two. We've got a statement of corporate intent, letters to go out, and we've got 2 directors on board. And so, and they are there to act in the best interests of the company, but also to act, they've been appointed to act in the manner that we've suggested that they do. And if they act in a manner contrary to that, they won't be directors. So that should answer that one. I've got about 5 more questions, after which I'm going to have a break, because I notice members of the public are disappearing out for 2-minute visits somewhere. Councillor Dalton, who is on crutches somewhere.
Thank you, no, I'm not on crutches, but I do have my legs up on my stool. Just a few questions. I wanted to ask about if you could, Peter, through the chair, just clarify or confirm the $1 million for the savings and the ECE if we withdraw from direct provision. What's the breakdown of that? $1 million?
Management will answer that.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Dalton. I'll bring Ross Churnside to the table. He's been missing out and would love to talk to the process here. While he's making his way to the table, I would reflect back to the appendix which talks about the savings opportunities and indeed the filtering mechanism which we go through, which I do talk about the must-dos, should-dos, could-dos and won't-dos aspect, and Ross will take it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. So there's probably 3 elements that make up the potential financial opportunity. There is the fact that on an operational basis, there would be we'd no longer be making the loss that we're currently making today. The second bit would be the savings in corporate overhead support costs that support the activity. And the third element is the opportunity cost or the alternative use of that space if it was rented out in another use.
And my question, I think, is going to be, you don't know, because it was a similar question to Councillor Henderson, and that is the impact on low-income families. So the very families we're trying to protect from a cost of living crisis, there's actually other things within this mayoral proposal that are contradicting exactly that. So no assessment on the impact on families involved in our Kāori Kids ECE.
To the chair, the answer is the same as what was given to Councillor Henderson's question earlier. You know, these are things that we work through as we develop the consultation material. Should there be a decision to consult on that item?
Okay, thank you. I have another question. Does Council apply for funding to philanthropic organisations and through Class 4 gaming machines to fund any of our work?
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. You've stumped us. We'll take that question away if that's okay.
I think it's quite important if we're proposing to cut grants to community contestable grants, and we're also seeking funds from that where they would need to go for their own survival. I think my other questions were mostly around the return on social investment. It's the questions that I would like to get some answers on before, next year, when you can bring them next year.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dalton. I can now confirm through the magic of technology that Class 4 doesn't typically fund council, but lotteries will co-fund with council in some circumstances. But we can dig more up on that.
And perhaps if we could find, oh yes, thank you, Peter, just different philanthropics and how much they have funded council to run our programs alongside the ratepayer dollar. Thank you.
I believe that philanthropic people support the art gallery. Councillor Hills has a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just say I have had some family news, so I'm not sure how much, how I might have to go up north, so I might not be able to be here for the whole event, sorry. Just some questions on the council grants. The specifics on will those be very clear in the consultation?
Just calling Claudia to the table again.
And another question to do with that, there is about, as far as I know, well over $500,000 of grants, at least in the arts and culture space, which are already locked in, contracted for 2 or 3 years. Are we looking to unpick those as well?
Through you, Your Worship, and thank you for the question. So, Customer and Community Services, but also other directorates in council do provide a large number of grants. The initial proposal here has been to look at the contestable grants, and within the contestable grants funding, we have some grants that can be potentially immediately addressed in the next financial year, which would allow us the extra financial leeway to make immediate savings. A large number of our grants, however, are contractual, and we do have contractual obligations. And so therefore, we will need to, and we will be identifying by February, the types of grants that could potentially be impacted so that the communities and elected members, of course, have visibility. There are limitations, and so we will need to be very careful, and we are already looking into this matter.
Okay, and will we have time to do any research on how many of the organisations, because often we are the first funder before organisations go out for other funding. Will we have any time to do research on how many of those groups will have to cease activity due to our decision?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Your Worship, I will need to look at that with our teams to see what level of detail we have. Sometimes to minimise the impact, we may look at quite sort of broad potential smaller cuts across a larger number. That may minimise the impact, but we need to look at the detail and then can understand further what specific abilities we can implement and what could be the potential impact. There could be some organisations that do rely on our core funding, but we haven't confirmed that yet.
Thank you. On the ECE, how, when you factor in, and obviously I'm not going to say the numbers, but when you factor in potential redundancy, if closure was the case, probably the staff time to go through this work, our assumption that we could earn $500,000 to $600,000 a year from, say, commercial rental, but that would be dependent on local boards, in my case, on the North Shore ward, deciding what goes in there, which could easily be room for hire instead. How can we assume a saving could be made in this year, even if it was delegated to CEO, which I'm thankful the Mayor has listened to the community feedback and myself and others on that, so thank you, Mayor. But I guess I'm just unsure how we can count that number assumption and Audit New Zealand would ever support it when there's so many variables.
Thank you for the question, and it's a very good question through you, Mr. Mayor. The actual savings that we've put forward here as part of the initial proposal is only our direct costs and the overheads related to the direct costs. So what we haven't included is the forecast potential alternative leasing of sites, and that will require some extra work. So there could be a potential further upside that we haven't assessed at this stage. In terms of the redundancies, the market is in high need of workforce. When we had a look at online sourcing or seeking of staff, there's a very, very large number of vacancies in the industry. What we would anticipate doing, should in some sites we move ahead with our ECE, moving perhaps to alternative providers, that we would work with alternative providers on transferring staff, minimising the implications for our teams, and of course minimising the implications for our customers and our communities.
Thank you. And sorry, Mayor, two more just brief questions. On AT, it does, and of course none of you can speak for AT, but I am concerned that their main go-to is just straight to service cuts. So, is that just a recognition that we will not have the bus drivers to fill those services anyway? So this is a reduction in budget based on actual output, or are we not ensuring they put cuts on not public-facing activity like bus services?
Oh, there's a whole lot of things in AT that aren't necessarily bus drivers' costs, and so we're having a whole look at that stuff as well. So I think that's where a lot of that's going to be from, and that's where I'm hoping that Williamson's committee will poke around in those areas as well. They themselves have admitted, the chairperson, that they're looking for a fresh approach to management and other things within. So I think it doesn't necessarily automatically run to a bus service missing.
Okay. Thank you. And last question on local boards. Obviously huge concerns about those assumed LDI cuts, but there's been a lot of answers on that. My more specific question is then, there is a comment here that fees and charges would only be going up by a maximum of CPI, but I've seen figures as of last night where some charges and fees would be going up hundreds of percent, even 1,000%. What is the sort of eyes that will be looking on that, and why is that verging from what we've got in here, which is a maximum of CPI increase?
So in the next item on the agenda, there's a report on fees and charges, and there is a general assumption most fees move with inflation, but there's some exceptions, and they're set out in that report. So it's probably best to cover that in the next agenda item.
Thank you.
Your Worship, if I could take the opportunity with Dr. Weiss at the table to clarify a question to Councillor Newman of earlier. We talked about the optimisation, minor reductions to open space levels of service. That is contained within the recommendations today for delegation to the Chief Executive. So I wanted to make that clear, that would be something that fits into the implementable type of filter, so that we can get going on it early and achieve those savings throughout the year. So I wanted to make that clear.
Okay, I was waiting in hope of finishing the questions before we had a minor break, but the questions are growing in a cancerous way, so we will have a break for 5 or 10 minutes now for the relief of all those who are ducking out of the room surreptitiously. We'll convene in about 7 minutes, if that's all right.